Well, hi, Newmarket Mayor John Taylor here, and I just want to add my voice to the many voices that are celebrating and supporting Black History Month here in Newmarket and across York Region. You know, the events of the last year or two have really hit home with many of us, the importance of advocating for and supporting the Black community here in Newmarket, York Region, Canada, and North America wide. Standing on strong shoulders is the theme of this year's Black History Month. And I think that's such an important theme. It's one that reminds us to think about who those strong shoulders were and what they had to do and what they had to endure to be the strength for today's leaders. I also want to just really make it clear that Black History Month is not only about celebrating history and those incredible leaders that brought us to where we are today, but it's also about understanding how that history impacts today and how we have to continue to fight for improvements, to advocate for change, and to ensure that the Black community has allies to support their ongoing efforts and ongoing struggle to create a better tomorrow for their communities. So please, Newmarket residents, take the time during Black History Month to not only learn the history, to understand and value some of those important figures on whose shoulders so many people stand today, but also take the time to think about how you can support the Black community in their efforts to create a better tomorrow, how you and I can be allies and advocates along with them for a better tomorrow. So everyone, enjoy Black History Month, learn from Black History Month, and commit to change as a result of Black History Month. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this message, and I look forward to an enriching and engaging month in February where we all take the time to learn more, to advocate more, and to support more. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to our first official flag raising in the town of Newmarket. I will begin by taking a moment of silence to remember all the people we lost to the global pandemic. My name is Jerisa Grant Hall, and I am the founder and chairperson of the Newmarket African Caribbean Canadian Association, a registered nonprofit incorporated under the laws of Ontario. We are a group of like-minded individuals who are committed to sharing and celebrating our stories, the stories that form the foundation of our collective history. We continue to operate under the vision to be a community that is strong and connected, where Black youth are connected to their past while firmly stepping into their future, and where the town of Newmarket and environs are welcoming and supportive. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. I also acknowledge that we convene this meeting upon the treaty lands of the First Nations of the Williams Treaty and the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation as our closest community. We also acknowledge that we are all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as immigrants, either in this generation or in generations past, and those who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. We must also recognize the fact that this colonial nation is founded in historic and ongoing dispossession of this land's indigenous peoples and African descendant peoples. Today, we especially pay tribute to the ancestors of those of African and indigenous origin and descent. As an organization that centers on social justice, we feel it is critical to be informed on the past and the ongoing consequences of colonialism. We encourage everyone to learn about the history of these lands and to support resistance here and across Turtle Island. I give thanks for the land that nourishes us and enables us to live in communities, may we continue to aspire to nurture and care for this land and for each other. On behalf of our board of directors, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mayor Taylor and the Town of Newmarket for partnering with us on this very important occasion of honoring the decade for the people of African descent with the raising of the Pan-African flag. I will offer some context around the use of the Pan-African flag, or Black Liberation flag, then speak more broadly about the decade and its significance. The colors of the Pan-African flag are red, which represents the blood of African descendant people. Black represents our skin, and green represents the wealth of the African continent. The idea and creation of the Pan-African flag began with Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican-born British political activist, Pan-Africanist, orator, and entrepreneur who spent his entire career advocating for Black dignity everywhere. The Pan-African flag is a symbol for Black struggle, Black pride, and Black liberation. It was formally adopted on August 13, 1920, by the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. On December 23, 2013, the United Nations declared the decade for the people of African descent. The decade was declared for 2015 to 2024 under the theme of recognition, justice, and development. In October 2016, the Canadian government invited the United Nations Working Group of experts on people of African descent to Canada. The group visited Ottawa, Toronto, Halifax, and Montreal. In their final report, the working group noted, and I quote, "The cumulative impact of anti-Black racism and discrimination faced by African Canadians in the enjoyment of their rights to education, health, housing, and employment, among other economic, social, and cultural rights, has had serious consequences for their overall well-being. Anti-Black racism continues to be systemic, leaving African Canadians among the poorest communities in Canada," end quote. According to the working group's report, quote, "Despite the reputation for promoting multiculturalism and diversity, and the positive measures taken by the national and provincial governments, there is deep concern about the structural racism that lies at the core of many Canadian institutions and the systemic anti-Black racism that continues to have a negative impact on the human rights situation of African Canadians," end quote. On January 30th, 2018, the Government of Canada officially recognized the International Decade for the People of African Descent. In Canada, over 1 million Canadians identify as Black, the majority of whom reside in Ontario. In Newmarket, nearly 3,000 residents identify as Black. The decade is almost over, and we still have not seen a lot of change. Many people are still not aware of the decade, even though it is international. The purpose of honoring the decade with a flag raising is to spotlight and bring to the forefront the humanity of Black people globally and locally, to put justice at the front of the line. Justice that has been denied of African descendant people for centuries. This is the time to get it right. The work to bring about justice cannot rest on the shoulders of Black people. The silence and denial that maintains the rhythm and pulse of anti-Black racism must be confronted and disrupted. We are calling on our allies to be anti-racist, to examine racist ideologies and dismantle them. Anti-Black racism is in our air, and it is at our dinner tables. Anti-Black racism resides in all of us as part of the legacy of colonialism and imperialism. All institutions reproduce and maintain anti-Black racism. If your diversity and inclusion strategy does not explicitly speak to or address anti-Black racism, you're not listening. The colonial project was a huge success, and we are now living with the aftermath of that success. How Black people move through Canadian society, where we live, work, and play, when and how we arrive here is a direct result of that colonial history. We are now seeing the impact of COVID-19 on Black and racialized communities. We still don't have equitable hiring practices. Workers' complaints of anti-Black racism are still not being addressed. And employee counseling service providers still do not know what racial trauma is. Black people have not had access to validation and healing in these spaces. According to African-centered psychotherapist Camila Clayton, quote, "People don't tend to think of mental illness or disrupted mental illness as the day-to-day experiences of microaggressions. They don't think of it as the panic attack that you feel every time you enter a school or workplace, and you can't describe it, but you know you have a visceral reaction. So because people don't recognize that, and they think the world is just set up like that, and they just have to figure it out and like grin and bear it, they don't understand that what they're experiencing potentially is a form of racial trauma if you're in a Black body," end quote. Most Canadians, including Black Canadians, are not fully aware of the health implications of racial trauma. Thanks to the generous funding of the Canadian Red Cross and our community partners, NACA has positioned itself to talk about and provide counseling support for Black community members across the York region experiencing racial trauma. We have placed Black mental health and wellness as a priority in our social justice work. We suggest you do the same. Black people are not inferior or less than. This is the ideology that we must work to dismantle. This Black History Month, our theme is Standing on Strong Shoulders. Black Canadians are not just resilient under the weight of oppressive systems. Black Canadians have been resistant in every area of our society that attempt to over-police and subjugate Black bodies. Please join us in our continued resistance against injustice. The goal is racial equity and Black dignity. Today's flag raising is symbolic in its call for recognition, justice, and development. It has been 400 years since the British government, to quote Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, took the first step to legally classify all Blacks in their colonies as non-human, chattel, property, and real estate, and proceeded with their European partners to build and manage with it a global business model, end quote. Blacks in Canada and elsewhere still do not breathe easy. We have 4 more years to get it right. We have 4 more years to get it right. Thank you.